the norm you see with folks like, similar situation? How would you describe it?
On this subject, I would say this has unfortunately now become very commonplace, and it's a real challenge for not just the FBI, but state and local law enforcement all over the country.
Tell me exactly the scope of, does the scope of your investigation include what I call that critical 5 minutes from when the 6:09, when this is based, I think, on information you've given to Congress, 6:09 when the shooter's identified on the roof, and 6:14 when President Trump is ultimately escorted off, and all that happens, the shots that take place in between there. Do you have access to the communications that were going on at the time in that critical 5 minutes?
So our investigation, when you say scope, our investigation includes that time frame, although focused again on the shooter himself and his death.
Now, shooter's involved in that. He's obviously involved in that time frame.
Correct, and as part of that, as part of our focus, our investigation of the shooter and the attack, of course, we are interviewing law enforcement from the scene because those are some of the most significant witnesses, and we're obviously getting access to their materials and that kind of thing. And the Secret Service has been fully cooperative.
You have access to the communications that exist there.
That exact question, I don't, as I sit here at the moment, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I know that Secret Service has been cooperative with us.
The Congress would like access to those communications as well. I mean, not just that 5 minutes, although I think that's the critical time frame. There's lots of communications we'd love to have access as well. I see my time is up, and they have called votes on the floor. I think there are about 6 minutes left in votes, so the committee will stand in recess until approximately 10 minutes after votes conclude on the House floor. The committee will come to order. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Wray, for being here with us today. Before I ask anything, let me just echo the comments made by others, especially the ranking member, decrying the state of political violence in this country. It's completely unacceptable. We have a democratic system that allows for us to disagree, but not to take those disagreements to violence. That's what we have elections for. And I want to also thank you and all of the FBI for the work that you do, and frankly, the unwarranted abuse and criticism that have been directed to you by conspiracy theorists and others. It doesn't make your hard job any easier, and I want you to know that many of us notice that and appreciate the work that you and your team are doing. Let me just ask a couple of quick questions. First, many of us are interested in the motives of the shooter here. When it's an assault on a political figure, you immediately assume there's a political motive, and that may be the case here. We don't know yet. But I was interested in what you're seeing on his phone. The press has reported that he had pictures not only of Mr. Trump, but of Mr. Biden and various other members, political figures. Can you discern, was there an element of mainly Republicans, maybe Democrats? Was it all over the board? Can you enlighten us about that?
Well, this is a place where it's particularly important for me to reiterate the caveat that I've included before, because in this instance in particular, we have a lot of legal process out for additional accounts and things like that that the shooter is associated with. So we're hoping to learn more, and we're still exploiting a number of the digital devices. Right. I think it's fair to say that we do not yet have a clear picture of his motive, and I think it's important for me to explain, because I understand, of course, why everybody wants to know the answers to those questions. Often in an investigation, from interviewing people that the subject was in close contact with, looking at the individual's social media accounts, messages, often things, physical evidence in the person's residence. You might see a manifesto, things like that. We're not seeing that yet, but we are digging in hard, because this is one of the central questions for us. What I can say is that the shooter appears to have done a lot of searches of public figures in general, but so far we're seeing kind of news articles and things like that, and so the images that have been reported about, really what we're talking about there are when you do a news search of an article, the image appears in the cache, as opposed to like a search for that specific individual. But again, I really want to be clear that that's a place that we're doing a lot of work right now and so more to come on that.
Well, I thank you for that clarification. We're interested also in the role of access to weapons when it comes to this terrible crime. The shooter used a semi-automatic rifle, really a weapon of war, that sadly has also been used in mass shootings around the country, including in my own district. It seems to me that the assault weapons ban that was once in place has to be a part of the national answer to curbing the epidemic of gun violence in America. I wonder if you could, with your help, Director Wray, understand a few aspects of the investigation. It's my understanding that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, was quickly able to trace the gun's purchaser, using records from an out-of-business gun store, records that the government is required to correct. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have suggested that collection should stop. There have been efforts to digitize it, which have been resisted. Can you tell us about how the origin of this gun purchase was discovered and the technology used?
I guess what I can say is we located a number of firearms associated with the shooter and his family. I think it was a total of, 14 in the house. The weapon that he used for the attempted assassination was an AR-style rifle that was purchased legally, that he is my understanding, acquired, I think bought actually from his father, who was the one who originally bought it, again, legally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired, so I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. Director, I'll try to ask questions that are answerable too. I think that's been done pretty well on both sides. You do the advanced threat assessment and deliver that information as to the general threat and then specifics as to protected people to the Secret Service. Is that correct?
Well, sort of. The Secret Service does a threat assessment, but they're doing that based on intelligence that they receive from a number of sources, including, of course, the FBI. So we share, whenever we have threat information related to a particular individual or protectee, then we share it with the Secret Service at a number of levels.
So you're a participant, but ultimately the responsibility for threat assessment as to these individuals belongs to the Secret Service.
Well, again, the threat assessment for the individual belongs to the Secret Service, but we are an important part of that because we share threat information, if we have any. They get threat information from a variety of sources. So,
and you get them from that same variety of sources. They've got no sources that are excluded from the FBI, do they?
Well, I don't know. I'm not aware of any that are excluded from the FBI, but they may receive information that comes directly to them that didn't come to us.
Sure. Okay. Director, do you believe that former President Trump was a high-risk threat under your assessment?
Well, I believe that former President Trump, really, frankly, like any president or former president, is a very high-profile figure and attracts a lot of, unfortunately, the kind of threats we've been talking about.
It's fair to say, not on a scale of 1 to a million with little nuances, but on a scale of 1 to 10, President Trump's risk was very similar to a current president, very similar to, because he was the presumptive nominee and leading in the polls and so on, that he was a high risk by any standard. Is that correct?
Certainly, there's a reason why he has so much protection around him.
Okay. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of assassinated senator and the nephew of an assassinated president, would you say he was also, as a presidential candidate, at significant risk?
Again, I think any presidential candidate raises some level of risk. It might vary from candidate to
candidate. But it's clearly a risk. Okay. In a nutshell, the day before this attack, President Trump was documented not to have gotten on multiple occasions from the Secret Service what they asked for. The day after, it looks like they're getting more. The day before, RFK had been denied by the president multiple times, Secret Service protection. The day after, he now has it. So now my question is, Is the actions of a 20-year-old with a lone gunman on a roof sufficient to change the risk assessment in your mind for President Trump and RFK, or are we just realizing the threat that was always there and being more appropriate in matching it? And I know that's a little vague, but you've been at this for a long time. Hindsight is 20/20. Now that we have hindsight, is it fair to say that giving Robert F. Kennedy Jr. security, upping the security, including drones, overhead support for the president, former president, these are all things that in hindsight should have been done the day before?
Well, let me try to answer your question this way. Of course, as I said, the assessments of the level of security to be provided to individual protectees.
No, I understand it's a Secret Service decision.
But what I would say to you is that, and I've been saying for quite some time, including in front of committees of this Congress, that we are in an elevated threat. We have been for some time. And that comes from a variety of quarters. It is, quite frankly, a dangerous time to be a prominent public official.
And in regards to that, the other side has spent a lot of time talking about what people on the right have said. But there was an attempted assassination on a Supreme Court justice. We have had the highest-ranking senator on the other side of this body saying that there were actions, that they were accountable. We have had multiple members of Congress in both the House and the Senate berating the character of members of the Supreme Court as a result of their decisions made, both sometimes 6-3, sometimes unanimous, whatever. Are those comments, not any one of them, but are those comments and the generation of that sort of, oh, this guy's bad for democracy, this Supreme Court justice is a threat to democracy, is that the kind of thing that raises the threat level, and would you caution against that?
Well, I do believe that we've seen an increase in threats of violence, which, again, that's the FBI's lane, not rhetoric, no matter how despicable or heated it is, but violence and threats of violence. We have seen an uptick in threats towards judges, among other prominent public officials, including, as you say, a case that we helped investigate involving a threat to a sitting Supreme Court justice.
An attempt.
An attempt.
Yeah, thank
correct.
you.
Right. And I think it's a reflection of a broader phenomenon that we are seeing in this country where people, again, very passionate, I respect that, very angry, I respect that, but there's a right way and a wrong way to express yourself when you're angry. And violence and threats of violence just can't be it. And that's where we fit in. It's not my role as FBI director to call out particular people's rhetoric. There's a place for that, but that's not my role as FBI director. But when it turns to violence and threats of violence, that has to be treated as unacceptable, and that's the way we look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Director, when did the FBI learn that Iran was threatening President Trump's life?
So I want to be a little bit careful here, not to talk about specific classified information, but we have been for quite some time, and I'll stick with what's in the open record. We, for some time, and I in particular for some time, have been calling out the efforts by the Iranian government to attempt to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani by going after current or former prominent U.S. officials, and we've even had an indictment against it. And I think that we need to recognize the brazenness of the Iranian regime, including right here in the United States. And I expect that we're going to see more of it, and I expect there'll be more coming on that. I'm not aware of any threat information related to protectees that wasn't, passed in a timely way, but I can't really get into specifics here.
It's minority's time here, but I just felt that was a question the committee needed to understand, and it sounds like you've known that for a long Secret Service.
Any information related to threats against the former president, which again, as we've sort of talked about, happens all too often, is something that we have a whole process we routinely share with the Secret Service at a number of levels in a timely way, and to my knowledge, that has consistently been followed.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Director Wray. Director Wray, the FBI is the independent law enforcement agency under the Department of Justice. Is that correct?
Yes.
And does the FBI director currently report to anyone?
Well, you mean in a chain of command
Yes.
reporting structure kind of
Yes.
thing? Yeah. So the FBI is part of the Justice Department. On the org chart, you would see that the FBI director, and this has been true for decades, reports to the Deputy Attorney General, who reports to the Attorney General. Obviously, reports in a communication sense, I report to any number of people.
As opposed to a micromanagement reporting system.
Correct.
And you would take issue, would you not, with any proposal that would change or alter that chain of command and place you or place a FBI director in the position of reporting directly to the president? Would you not? You would oppose that?
I don't think that would be a wise reporting structure. I think the structure that we've had for decades now makes sense. I think there's a difference between independence in a sort of organizational structure perspective and independence in terms of the way you do the work. Obviously, the FBI is part of the Justice Department.
Well, reporting directly to the president would eliminate your independence, would it not?
I don't think it would help.
Yeah. And you're familiar with Project 2025, are you not?
I mean, I've seen news reports about it. I'm not particularly familiar with it.
You're aware that it is a game plan for President Trump's first 120 days in office, correct?
I'm really not familiar with the details. Again, I've seen reporting about it.
It is, and what he proposes to do is to force the FBI director to appoint, report directly to him. That's what he wants to do within the first 120 days. He also wants to eliminate the position of FBI General Counsel. That is also set forth in Project 2025. How would you recommend that?
I think the FBI's Office of General Counsel serves an incredibly important role, including in terms of advising our workforce. We have 38,000 people. The idea of having an organization like ours, an independent law enforcement agency like ours that doesn't have its own general counsel's office doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it would seem like any proposal that would force the director to report to the president, and then there would be no legal counsel for the director of the FBI. That seems like it's an attempt to neuter the FBI and render it accountable only to the president. Isn't that correct?
Well, let me put it this way. I recognize that the FBI director, this FBI director and every FBI director before me, serves at the pleasure of the president. And that's part of our system. I was appointed by President Trump. I respect that. I think that's a part of our structure. But independence in terms of how we do our work is what matters to me. And we need to be able to do our work in a way that is free from political interference.
Well, you wouldn't be able to do that by reporting everything you do to the president and getting his authority and approval before you take action, correct?
I don't think that would be a wise approach.
And then there's even a proposal to replace many of those 38,000 dedicated civil servants who work for the FBI, replace them with a MAGA group that has pledged its allegiance to Donald Trump. What danger would that bring to the FBI if that were to happen?
Well, again, I haven't read or reviewed this thing that you're referring to.
Assuming what I say is true.
But the FBI is made up of 38,000 dedicated career law enforcement professionals. It has no political appointees of any kind, unless you count me as a nominee of the former president.
Either,
I don't think that should change.
You
I
don't
think
want
that is
a bunch
that is
of MAGA
part of how we do our work.
being being the employees of the FBI.
We're coming up on 116 years of the FBI, and that's the way it has been for 116
It would
years.
be crazy to take 38,000 MAGA loyalists and put them at the FBI. That's frightening. That's what Project 2025 proposes, and I'm glad to know that you are not with that program, and with that I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Was the shooter on the FBI's radar in any way prior to the assassination attempt?
We did not have any information about the shooter. He was not in our holdings before the shooting.
No communication in any chat rooms, no CIs or confidential human sources have any interaction with?
No, we've run a thorough search for the subject through all of our holdings, and he was not in them anywhere.
Were there any FBI agents or informants present at the Trump rally in Butler?
Not to my knowledge.
And Mr. Jordan was talking to you about Iran. Were law enforcement resources diverted from the protection of President Trump to John Bolton as a consequence of concern that Mr. Bolton might have been the target of Iranian malign efforts?
That's really a Secret Service decision. I don't know the answer to that. That's really something they would know better. What I can tell you is that there are a number of individuals. You mentioned one who we've brought a case, a specific criminal case for the Iranians targeting for assassination. But how the
Are you going to get that
allocates-
answer to us? Whether or not resources were diverted from Trump to Bolton? Is that just going to be part of your review?
I think that's going to be part of the reviews by the Inspector General.
The Inspector
and
General for DHS, right?
Of DHS
Right,
and the
I-
outside
got
panel.
it. And I think that's an important point because the Inspector General for DHS has really fallen out of favor with the administration because he's been pointing out all the problems on the border with Mayorkas and Biden, and we're always kind of worried that they're about to fire him, which would be a really bad idea now that this role that you've identified is so critical. Be a bad idea to fire the IG for DHS during the pendency of this, right, Mr. Director?
I don't think that would be a good idea.
I'm with you on that. So I want to zoom out a little bit. How often do you brief President Biden?
You mean on this
No,
specific
just generally.
case?
No, in your role as FBI director.
I mean, I don't know that I could give you a number.
Is it like weekly, monthly, daily?
It's not at a regular cadence. There have been times when there have been months at a time when I haven't, and then there have been times when several days apart I have.
Okay.
It's always with other people.
The vice president, is she typically there?
Often has been.
Okay, so when did you notice his decline?
In my interactions, in my role, all my interactions with the current president have been completely professional.
Right, but I mean the cognitive decline. I'm not saying he treated you unprofessionally, just maybe not picking things up as quickly as he used to.
Again, I don't meet with him very often, but what you're describing is not something that I've observed during my interactions with him.
I mean, we've had it observed so often that the ranking member and Mr. Schiff on this committee have said that he could no longer continue as a candidate. And so, since you're the FBI director, I was just sort of wondering, like, who's running the country? Like if something bad happened, you'd have to go brief President Biden about it right now? God forbid?
And on any number of occasions, I have briefed the president, and as I said, those briefings have all been uneventful and unremarkable.
Oh, I can imagine them being uneventful. But in the work where the vice president's also present, like you say, there's like more than half the time there's these briefings, she's there too?
I don't know if I'd said more than half the time. Certainly, there have been times where she's been present. There have been other times where she hasn't.
I take you at your word when you say this is the most complicated threat environment you've ever observed over a long career in law enforcement. And I'm just kind of wondering, with this assassination attempt, with the invasion at our border, with all the Hamas that have been let in that you've talked about and briefed about, like, is Biden up to it? And if he's not up to it, and you're a guy who's been regularly briefing him, like, who's been in on this conspiracy to hide the real Joe Biden from all of us for years? It never occurred to you that this guy wasn't up to it in all these briefings you did?
As I said, my briefings with the president have all been completely fine.
Were they
I
between
briefed,
10 a.m. and
he's
4
asked
p.m.?
questions. There hasn't been anything of note in the area that you're talking about.
Yeah, did you ever have to brief him before 10 a.m. or after 4 p.m.? We hear those are as good hours.
I certainly, times that I have briefed have included outside those hours.
Right. Okay. I just, I think the American people want to know how we got to this point with someone who's so diminished his own party has basically put him out to pasture. And since you had close proximity and the vice president had close proximity, I'm just kind of wondering if you were being straight with all of us about how things were going with him. I guess we'll have to figure that out.
You can count on me to be straight with you, sir.
We'll see.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to recognize, unfortunately, the fact that our colleague and my colleagues side by side made for many, many years in this committee.